Now, from CBS News Miami, this is Facing South Florida with Jim DeFede.
Welcome to Facing South Florida. I'm Jim DeFede. On September 30th, the state's new chief financial officer, Blaise Ingoglia, held a press conference in Pembroke Pines in which he made a stunning announcement. He said his team had conducted a high-level spending comparison and audit of Broward County government, and the results, well, they were not good.
We increase the budget every year for inflation and population, and then got to a number of where the budget should be today if you increased it just by inflation and just by population. Then what we did on top of that is that large government budgets such as Broward are very inefficient. The larger they get, the more inefficient they become. So what we did is we added not one but two buffers on top of that, and then we got to the number. That's the number where the budget probably should be or could be. And once you calculate that, you will start seeing that Broward County has added an extra $190 million in excessive, wasteful spending in its general fund budget.
$190 million is a truly staggering figure. Now, the Broward audit was just one of several announcements he's made in recent weeks. He kicked off his tour in Jacksonville in mid-September.
The city of Jacksonville is overtaxing and overspending your money to the tune of almost $200 million.
A week later, he was in Hillsborough County.
Our numbers reveal that Hillsborough County is excessively spending to the tune of $278 million.
The next day, it was Alachua County.
In Alachua County, there is about $84 million worth of wasteful spending.
And here he was in Seminole County on October 7th.
Seminole County blew past that number. In our estimation, $48,445,891.
And in Manatee County on October 16th,
they blew past that number by $112 million.
But by the time he made it to Miami last week, he started working a little humor into his routine.
You know, it's starting to get to the point where I show up in a local government and everyone starts to wonder, why is he here? In fact, I think one of my friends said I'm starting to turn into the Jim Cantori of wasteful spending. So when we show up, it's usually not good news. And unfortunately today, I'm here to share some sobering news about the spending that has been going on in the city of Miami.
And so how much did Miami's budget increase above what he calculated was an acceptable amount?
The city of Miami blew past that number by $94 million. That math doesn't math. It doesn't make sense.
But he appears to have saved the best for last. On Thursday, he hit Miami-Dade County.
I'm here to tell the people, the great people of Miami-Dade, how much their local government has overspent and overtaxed them. And that number in Miami-Dade is $302 million.
The gasps are my favorite part. During the press conference, he summed up his efforts this way.
Now, so far, as we are doing this, we have done these calculations and these presentations on 8 local governments. And I wish I could say I was proud to say the total is $1.2 billion. It is unfortunate that that total is $1.2 billion that we have found in just 8 local governments.
Again, he refers to these reviews as high-level spending comparisons and audits. And it's important to remember that Ingoglia only became the CFO on July 21st. So the notion that you could conduct even one legitimate, high-level, comprehensive government audit in that amount of time, let alone 7 or 8 or 9, seems doubtful. And if you are wondering why he was standing in front of a podium with the word FAFO on it, that's the name of the group he created to conduct these reviews, the Florida Agency for Fiscal Oversight, or FAFO, F-A-F-O, which, for those of you who don't know, is a slang term adopted recently by right-wing politicians led by President Donald Trump which means, well, F around and find out. But let's set that aside. And look, I want to be clear. I'm sure there is wasteful spending in these governments, but I'm not sure the quote-unquote formula he has come up with is the right way to determine it. And perhaps more troubling, even though they held all these press conferences and made these sensational claims, they have not produced a single document, a single report showing what numbers they have been using or if their math is correct. And when I tried to look deeper into his claims that there was $190 million in wasteful spending in Broward this year, well, to use his own words, the math is not mathing. In a moment, I'm going to play for you part of an interview I did with Ingoglia almost 3 weeks ago. I've been holding it because I wanted him and his office to provide more information to support his claims. I sent them the findings of my review and asked them to comment on it. But they haven't responded to any of the specific problems I think I've uncovered. So here is the first part of my interview with Ingoglia, where I start by asking him to define wasteful spending.
What I would consider wasteful and excessive spending is any use of taxpayer dollars that are over and above what is actually needed to deliver the services to the taxpayers. And those are some of the eye-popping numbers that you're seeing, specifically in Broward, $190 million of wasteful and excessive spending just this year alone.
You arrived at that number through basic calculations. You took the general fund, you took the inflation, you took population growth, and then you gave, I think it was, is it a total of 15% cushion on top of that?
Yeah, it's a 5% and a 10% cushion. It doesn't work out to exactly 15% the way it's calculated, but there is a government inefficiency cushion that we factor in there. You know, trying to give extra money to the government in their calculations just to prove just how bad the excessive and wasteful spending is. But yes, you are correct. We started off with the 2019-2020 budget. We indexed forward for inflation and population, including not one but two government inefficiency buffers. And then we figured out what the budget should have been under normal circumstances today. But then they took all the excessive revenue and they spent it. And that's where we're coming up at the $190 million.
So it's purely a number. It's not, you have not evaluated how, let's assume that you're right. Let's assume that they spent $190 million more than your rate of inflation and population growth would normally suggest. You didn't analyze how that $190 million was spent, if it was spent wisely or not. You're just saying anything above this number that should be for regular growth, anything above that number is wasteful spending no matter how it's used, correct?
Yeah, because this is the bottom line, is that when you have increases in population and inflation, costs go up. We calculate for that. If you have more people moving in, and I think it was 56,000 people moving into Broward County, new residents over the last 5 years, then you're going to have more fire, more police. We've already accounted for that. That number is wasteful and excessive spending over what we would normally have in terms of revenue if there wasn't an increase in property values and a corresponding increase in property taxes. And a lot of that is personnel. So when you look at the amount of personnel that local governments are increasing, yes, there are fire, yes, there are police, but it's also a lot of bureaucrats that they are hiring at the local government, and they're expanding the government footprint. And it's money that really shouldn't have been collected or expended in the first place, in our opinion.
Can you please address the question that you are singling out Democratic counties, Democratic places in the state to go after, such as Broward? You're going to go after Dade. That it seems to me that the perception is you're focused on going after Democratic blue counties than anything else.
We are going after any local government that we think are excessively spending and overtaxing its citizens. The idea that we're going after blue counties is just not accurate. You know, we did the same calculation with Hillsborough County, which I think the supermajority on the Hillsborough County Commission, not only being a red county, barely a red county, but they're all Republicans, and they had $276 million worth of wasteful spending. We were in Seminole County the other day, which the supermajority of them on the county commission in a red county
When we come back, we will continue our conversation with the state's chief financial officer, but more importantly, did the CFO and his team accidentally use the wrong numbers for Broward County? You may be surprised by what we found. Stay with us. Welcome back. The accusation that Broward County has $190 million of wasteful spending this year is a staggering charge, and I realize most people who live in Broward probably agree with Ingoglia and believe government is filled with lazy, do-nothing bureaucrats. And again, I am sure there is wasteful spending. But if you are going to attack government and accuse them of violating the public trust, you better make sure your numbers and your facts are correct. And for weeks, I have been trying to confirm what the CFO claims is happening in Broward, but I haven't been able to do it. And the problem is that while Ingoglia has made these claims against Broward and a half a dozen other counties and cities, he hasn't provided the actual supporting material to back up his headline-grabbing complaints. So let's go through it again. He bases everything on a formula. You start with fiscal year 2020 and then adjust each year for inflation and population, and add what he describes as a 10% and 5% cushion. And as you heard in the first block, he argues if government grows beyond that number, it's automatically considered wasteful spending regardless of what it was used for. But what if the numbers you plug into the formula are wrong? Let's start with population. He claims Broward's population grew from fiscal year 20 to fiscal year 25 by 56,862 residents. But he doesn't say where he came up with that number. As I understand it, the best source for population growth that is widely used by economists and government officials comes from the University of Florida's Bureau of Economic and Business Research. And according to them, they report that Broward's population has increased by 75,603. That's a significant difference. Now let's look at inflation. The CFO's office has not released where they came up with their inflation numbers, but in my conversations with Ingoglia, he said they had inflation increasing in Broward by 24% in the last 5 years. But according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics Consumer Price Index for Miami, Fort Lauderdale, and West Palm Beach, the inflation rate over the last 5 years is actually 29%. Again, that's a big difference. But perhaps the greatest problem in the CFO's formula is the number his team used as their starting point for 2020. Here is a tweet from the CFO's communications director. Another day, another bureaucrat that doesn't look at their own budget documents. Our FAFO pulled budget numbers directly from Broward County's website, as you can see here. And she offers screenshots of 2 documents. The first, from 2020, shows the general fund as $1,306,000. And then she compares it to the 2025 adopted budget of $1,923,000. Except here's the problem. They were pulling numbers from 2 different documents. As Booker revealed in her tweet, the 2020 number came from something called the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, and the 2025 number came from a document commonly referred to as the budget book. Let me be clear. Those are 2 distinct and different documents. You cannot compare one to the other. You always want to compare apples to apples, and what they did was compare apples to oranges. In other words, you can either compare the budget book number in 2020 to the number in 2025, or you can compare the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report for 2020 to the report for 2025. But you can't take numbers from one and compare it to the other and call it a serious high-level spending comparison. I went back and looked at the differences between the Comprehensive Annual Financial Report and the budget book for the last 5 years, and as you can see, the budget book is always higher than the annual financial report. What does that mean? Well, it means the number the CFO used as his starting point in 2020 was off by more than $81 million. And so when you take it all together, a starting number that was off by $81 million, and you compound it every year with what appears to be the wrong numbers for inflation and the wrong numbers for population growth, you can end up wrongfully accusing Broward of $190 million in wasteful spending. When I spoke to CFO Ingoglia a couple weeks ago, I told him what we had found. The numbers that I pulled from the Broward County budget for their general fund do not match the numbers that you guys put out.
Those numbers match. We actually posted it on Twitter for everyone to see. We pulled the information directly from their budget. Not only did we pull the information directly from their budget, we screenshotted it and we tweeted it out. It showed and highlighted and showed everyone exactly where we got the budget numbers from. These numbers are coming directly from their budgets, Jim.
They say no.
Of course they're going to say no, because we're shining light on excessive wasteful spending to the tune of $200 million. They're going to do everything they can. They're going to try to smoke and mirrors and try to deflect, but the numbers come directly from their budget. We tweeted it out.
When we haven't seen the report, when we don't actually see the way you're plugging the numbers in, they don't seem to add up right.
Yeah, but you know what, Jim, here's the deal. It adds up right to the people who are actually being overtaxed, because I understand that government is going to come out and government is going to try to refute our numbers, and they're going to do everything that they possibly can in order to keep the big bloated budgets. But what I would ask everyone listening to my voice right now is take a look at your property tax bill. And are you going to believe the person who's actually saying that, no, you're being overtaxed because local government is being overspent? Or do you believe the elected politicians and bureaucrats will actually put you in a position where your property tax bill has skyrocketed over the past 5 years? Look, a lot of this is about the citizens and the taxpayers. And we know that we are having the start of a property tax revolt here in the state of Florida in the mid-2020s, similar to what we had in the mid-2000s. People are hurting when it comes to property taxes. They know that their government is spending money on things that they're not supposed to be spending on. They're excessively spending, and their property taxes are going up. So local governments can spin it all they want. They can say that they haven't seen the numbers, but all they have to do is just walk down Main Street and listen to the people that they're taxing, and they will tell them that they're spending too much money.
Is the goal here to eliminate homesteaded property taxes in the state? In other words, are you trying to begin to make the case that there is so much wasteful spending that we don't need to have homestead property taxed any longer? That if the governor has basically said that he thinks it's wrong that people pay rent for their property that they reside in. Do you share that view that people should not have to pay property taxes if they're homesteaded?
I do. I think that is a lofty goal that the legislature should try to attain. I think the goal here is elimination of property taxes on homesteaded properties altogether. And then on top of that, could you imagine the prosperity we would have here in the state of Florida? We would be the only state in the nation that have no personal income taxes and no personal property taxes on homesteaded properties. You want to talk about creating generational wealth? That's it. So I am all for getting rid of it, but also a philosophical argument, which the governor has outlined, is that when you pay for something, you're continually paying for it year after year in the form of, taxation, property taxes, basically like renting it from the local government. So I agree with him that it should be done as an aspirational goal, working towards that, but philosophically also.
So as a homesteaded property owner, I shouldn't have to pay for any of the services that I receive. That's your...
No, I didn't say that because you're actually paying for it also in other ways, through sales taxes, through sales tax, when you use your cell phone, the CST tax. So the general fund budget is made up from other revenue sources other than property taxes, but property taxes are a big portion of that. But let's not forget that the majority of ad valorem taxes in the state of Florida are paid by non-homesteaded properties.
Let me just sort of wrap up by asking, by sort of coming full circle. It just seems to me that you're trying to convince the public that they can receive services and not have to pay for them.
No, that's not what we're saying, Jim. What we're saying is that they're being overtaxed for the amount of services that they are actually receiving.
Yeah. We will.
Jim, the numbers are Jim, the numbers are the numbers. We look, when we release these numbers, we go through them and we have teams of CPAs. We have the Department of Revenue that are actually making sure that we are calculating it correctly. We're taking painstaking steps and double and triple checking our numbers. You know what? I've been calling BS on local governments and governments over the last 20 years. You know, locally when I did Government Gone Wild, nationally when I was one of the first people to start calling out the excessive waste in the federal government. Not once has anyone been able to say that any of our information was correct. In fact, it was incorrect. In fact, it was validated as being correct. So I like our track record with shining the light on waste, fraud, and abuse than somebody that's actually trying to keep the waste, fraud, and abuse.
Yeah, you see, you could just, but that's the point. You just yell waste, fraud, and abuse often enough and you get everyone on your side, because who's in favor of waste, fraud, and abuse?
Yeah, but you know what people are also in favor of? Lower property taxes and property tax reform. Look, people are hurting right now. Property taxes, we are getting to the point where if you're in between 20 and 30 years old, it's almost impossible to own and buy your first home right now because of property taxes. And it's really hurting affordability. And this is another thing that you don't hear from local governments. Local governments talk out of both sides of their mouths. They say, we need more affordable housing. We need more affordable housing. But when we showed them how to get affordable housing by reducing property taxes on people, they're not interested in that. They're just interested in, putting money into another nonprofit and subsidizing instead of reducing their own budgets themselves. I'm sorry to say, but that's exactly what it is.
Now I want to make something perfectly clear. I don't think the CFO or anyone in his office deliberately got the numbers wrong. I just think they likely made a mistake, which can happen when you are trying to rush out all of these supposed audits. If this was a real audit, they would have met with Broward officials, gone through the numbers with them in private, and then, if there was a mistake, it could have been caught sooner. But they didn't do that. Instead, they just rushed it out in a press conference. And as far as the numbers for Miami-Dade, Miami, and the other counties around Florida, I haven't had a chance to see if there are similar questions and concerns with those calculations. And even if I did, I know this whole exercise is a bit of a fool's errand on my part. I understand that it doesn't matter if I or anyone else proves that these numbers are wrong or that they fail to consider all of the unfunded mandates the state of Florida has placed on local governments in the last 5 years. The public will always believe someone who tells them the government is ripping them off, because it comforts us to think we can fully fund police and fire and build roads and have parks and libraries and everything else we demand from local government without having to pay for them. All we need to do is just cut this waste. If only it was that simple. We'll be right back.